First of all, Dr. Lee and other vice chairs of IPCC, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we owe a great deal to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has offered overwhelming evidence of the primary drivers of climate change. Five editions of world-class scientific knowledge and empirical evidence in the IPCC reports have incrementally raised awareness and built public knowledge about the causative factors as well as the scientific, technical, socio-economic impacts of climate change. The state of the art of climate change assessments and forecasts in the report offer early warning signs of the rapid depletion of natural capital associated with our current development course, which has impacted ecosystems, air quality, and terrestrial as well as aquatic biodiversity. The findings of the first four IPCC reports have already shaped the context of dialogue, debates, and negotiations on global climate change. This fifth edition, which we will hear more about, is continuing this trend in the lead up to the 21st Conference of the Parties, COP21, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, to be held in Paris in December. Climate science has again provided compelling evidence that outdated development strategies and human-driven environmental degradation have, over a number of decades, changed our climate dynamics. Time is running out. The long-term cost of fossil fuel dependence and the overexploitation of other natural resources far outweigh their short-term benefits, and the cost of inaction is disastrous. Evidence confirms that our remaining global carbon budget to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius is being rapidly depleted. Emission reductions of 40 to 70% relative to 2010 levels are required by mid-century just to stabilize the global climate system. Climate change is the single greatest challenge confronting the Asia-Pacific region. We bear witness on an almost daily basis to the impacts of the melting Himalayan glaciers, rising sea levels, widespread floods and droughts, in addition to the growing intensity and frequency of Asia-Pacific typhoons and tsunami in Indian Ocean and other places. Our region bears the brunt of half of all natural disasters, and as home to more than 4 billion people, the burden of climate change falls disproportionately on those who are already marginalized, the rural poor, subsistence farmers, and people in low-lying Pacific islands and in other coastal areas. Asia and the Pacific also accounts for 9 out of the 10 countries in the world at the highest mortality rate risk from flooding, and 6 out of the 10 countries with the highest tropical cyclone mortality. Our region contributes about 51% of global greenhouse gas emissions and is home to 5 out of the top 10 emitters. As such, the region has the potential to be a major part of the solution to the climate change. Policy responses are complicated, though, as the region has yet to extend energy access to 800 million unserved people, it has to meet the energy deficit facing our productive sectors and balance the nexus between the competing demands of food, energy, and water. It is also inevitable that there will be some growth in emissions by developing countries as they progress along their development paths before these levels can begin to decline. These challenges have to be managed along with increasing climate variability and extreme weather events. The new global and regional sustainable development agenda can directly and indirectly respect, safeguard, and protect our planet for future generations. A number of the proposed new sustainable development goals deal with climate change. SDG 1 on ending poverty in all its forms, for instance, calls for reducing exposure and vulnerability to climate-related extreme events, as well as to other shocks and disasters. And SDG 13 calls on the international community to take action to combat climate change and its impact. At the same time, SDG 2 promotes sustainable food production systems and resilient agriculture practices, which strengthen capacities for adaptation to climate change. SDG 11 proposes increasing the number of cities and settlements adopting and implementing integrated policies and plans for mitigation and adaptation. SDG 13 also calls for the implementation of commitments by developed country parties to the UNFCCC to jointly mobilize 100 billion annually by 2020 and fully operationalize the Green Climate Fund through its capitalization. In addition to climate financing, science, technology, and innovation are further means of implementation which are fundamental to address the climate challenge. Scaling up national SDI capacities and promoting technology development, incubation, commercialization, and transfer can provide us with better technologies at lower cost to usher in low-carbon societies. Many of the investments in emission reductions will also generate new investment and yield public and private co-benefits, especially in areas such as air quality, rural electrification, and increased competitiveness. Following the United Nations Secretary General's 2014 Climate Summit in New York, there has been a build-up of political momentum for a meaningful universal climate agreement in Paris in 2015, and to galvanize transformative action. Increasing number of leaders have committed to limit the global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels, and countries have reaffirmed their intended national determined contribution INDCs for the new agreement. Several Asia-Pacific member states have given encouraging indications of their commitment to addressing emissions through the INDCs. In interest of time, I will just quote as an example China. China's targets under its INDCs includes ensuring its CO2 emissions peak before 2030 and reducing carbon intensity by 60 to 65% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. More countries in our region will be making commitments in the lead up to COP21. It is hoped that ambition on emissions reduction can increase over time, and these INDCs will be exceeded as new technologies and effectively policy instruments make a growing impact. Among other noteworthy developments has been the introduction in the cost of many clean energy sources, which has triggered a boom in low carbon technologies such as wind and solar. A record 91 gigawatts of wind and solar energy capacity was installed worldwide in 2014. Clean energy technologies are also spreading rapidly to Asia. For instance, China's investments in renewables in 2014 jumped to 83.3 billion, a 33% increase on the previous year, and India has announced plans to ramp up its solar energy target to 100 gigawatts by 2022. Although the World Economic Forum estimates that 0.7 trillion, or roughly 1% of global GDP, is required annually to deliver on the infrastructure required to contain the temperature rise to just 2 degrees, the latest figures that I was able to locate from IPCC previous reports show that between 2010 to 2012, about 343 to 385 billion flowed towards low carbon activities, of which 95% were for reducing emissions, mitigation in particular. Fresh pledges were made earlier this year to the Green Climate Fund, which are in the order of close to $10 billion. Private financing has also been on the rise, and green bond issuance has risen to $36.6 billion, tripling the $11 billion issued in 2013, with cumulative outstanding green bonds estimated to be about $65 billion, with China and India now taking the lead. A 2015 HSBC report estimates the climate investment opportunity to be in the range of 100 trillion, with the current level of climate-aligned bonds outstanding in the region of close to 598 billion, of which transport-related bond issuance account for the largest share. The G20 countries have taken positive steps towards climate action, including forming the Climate Finance Study Group now for some years, which advises G20 finance ministers, and by including financing for climate change on its agenda this year, we are hoping there will be fresh, renewed commitment. The G7 group that met earlier this year committed to also phase out the use of fossil fuels by the end of the century. So in conclusion, as I see, there is a strong political will, but more stronger political will be critical to develop a legal framework for a universal agreement on climate change in Paris, which will address human-induced climate change and aim to limit average global warming to 2 degrees. Strong action will also require effective partnerships and global alliances, including the close cooperation of governments, civil society, the private sector, and all development partners. In this context, UN system will be served by making greater use of the intergovernmental platforms of the regional commissions, such as ESCAP. ESCAP has been proactive in deliberations on the 2013 Sustainable Development Agenda, and will pursue further follow-up and review to, among others, share information, knowledge, and experiences, support the strengthening of national capabilities, and define coherent regional policies and approaches. In tandem, our platform will promote the full potential of regional and South-South financing and STI to accelerate our progress and integrate our effort on climate with the SDGs. We need to redouble our efforts in strengthening STI and bring the benefits of innovative technology to every corner of our region. If we are to tackle climate change with the required urgency, however, we must do more to increase and speed this transition. We need more investment and more innovative methods of investment in mitigation and adaptation initiatives. It is entirely within our reach. An investment of just 1 or 2% of global GDP means we can not only manage the risk of climate change, but also create a global economy that is clean, efficient, and fundamentally sustainable. I thank you all, and I thank our colleagues from IPCC to be here to share the findings in more detail with all of us. Thank you for being here.